The political reaction to today's high court ruling suggests that this fight really has only just begun. The tone from leading Democrats was curiously absent of the kind of reluctant acceptance one often hears in the aftermath of unfavorable court decisions. There was no, we disagree with the decision, but we respect the decision. Instead, an angry tone was set from the very top.
Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country.
Well, never mind that abortion and the right to abortion was never mentioned in the Constitution. At least the president did, however, appeal for nonviolent protests.
I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable.
Speaker Pelosi was even less accepting at a morning press conference right after the Supreme Court decision today. She told reporters this morning the radical Supreme Court, that's the word she used, the radical Supreme Court, is eviscerating American rights and endangering their health and safety. She made no mention of over 60 million aborted babies since the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, whose health, safety, and very lives were not just endangered, but were ended. And former President Barack Obama himself, a politician, tweeted the court relegated abortion, quote, to the whims of politicians and ideologues. He said the decision attacked essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Again, no mention of the millions of babies denied freedom and life. And perhaps most alarming was the statement of the nation's chief law enforcement officer, Attorney General Merrick Garland, the man who, in contradiction to federal law, has made no arrests of protesters at the homes of justices. Today, he again thumbed his nose at the law, tweeting, quote, the Justice Department will work tirelessly to protect and advance reproductive freedom. One critic suggests that Garland's phrasing there suggests a potential Democratic legal challenge based on a theory that abortion may qualify as interstate commerce that cannot be regulated by the states. That, as the Disney Corporation announced that it would provide free transportation to its employees for abortion services to other states should Florida outlaw the practice. And in a show of irony, one progressive member of Congress, a familiar face, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was apparently oblivious to our country's three co-equal branches of government. She went to the Supreme Court and chanted illegitimate in front of the one branch of government that she doesn't particularly care for. Joining us now, Jordan Sekulow, the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, to help us break down the Supreme Court's decision, the claim that the left has been making about the unconstitutionality of the decision, and what happens next in the fight for life in the post-Roe era. Jordan, good to see you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a tweet made by President Biden just a little while ago. He said in the tweet, "Today is a very solemn moment for the United States. The Supreme Court expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized." Did they do that?
No, in fact, I think what the Supreme Court did today was clarify what has been nearly 50 years of an argument that was very unclear. You had every time a state tried to put in a restriction or rule on abortion, it had to go back through a court process, but it wasn't about the political or legislative process. So it didn't matter who you elected in your state on this issue of abortion. It mattered who were in the courts, and the courts went back and forth. Some partial birth abortion bans were constitutional. Other partial birth abortion bans weren't constitutional. And so issues like that, how do you get this out of the courts? So we've known from the beginning, and the proponents of Roe versus Wade have known since Roe versus Wade, it's very difficult to argue in favor of constitutionally. If you go back to the oral arguments, where do you find this right? Of course, it's not expressly in the Constitution, but even if you read into the Constitution this right to privacy, there is another competing right here that the court recognized today. And it's not just about the individual receiving an abortion, but it's also the competing right of the child that is also in the womb. And they're recognizing that states have an interest in not only protecting the person who might be seeking an abortion, but the person inside the womb and protecting them. And so they did not fully declare personhood of the unborn child. They've returned this back to the states so that the people's representatives will be able to decide, and they'll be able to have that input on what kind of restrictions are in place. I think we're going to see very different reactions in different states across the country.
Right. So what is the ultimate intention of the Democrats? President Biden is not the only one making that argument about having a constitutional right revoked by the Supreme Court. We've heard it from former President Barack Obama. We've heard it from Speaker Pelosi. We've heard it from Senate Majority Leader Schumer. What's their intention here? Is it to set the table for another Supreme Court challenge? Is it to delegitimize the high court? What are your thoughts?
I think they definitely want to delegitimize the courts. I think we're going to hear again about court packing, adding more justices to the court, that somehow this is not this court is illegitimate. We saw that was the chant outside of the court today by AOC and some other members of the more liberal wing of Congress. But ultimately here, this is a Supreme Court decision. And I want to say there were a lot of people out there who fought hard to get these justices confirmed, whether you start with President Trump nominating these justices. That you think about Justice Barrett. There was a lot of controversy there over the timing of that. And you got to think about what people like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham did to get that nomination through. But ultimately, and also decide not to no longer have the filibuster, the 60-vote threshold to get those nominations through, which started with Justice Gorsuch, the first nomination by President Trump. So ultimately here today, what we saw was the court, I think, correcting history by saying we got this wrong. We have gotten cases wrong in the past, especially cases involving civil rights early on, and the court has come back and said, it doesn't matter that we got this wrong for 50 years. If we got it wrong, we need to correct it. And ultimately, we're now going to be able to have this debate outside of the federal courts and back in Washington, D.C. But obviously, the politicians, especially on the left, are going to make this about, trying to make this about a November midterm political issue and try to somehow convince people that this is a parade of horribles coming. But I think what realistic people, and that's what I'm trying to be for the audience today, know that this will now be a debate that goes back to your state. Some states will have laws that go into force today, Doug, that are similar to the Mississippi law that was upheld. That is an abortion ban starting at 15 weeks. And so some states have done that. Other states that are states with very conservative governments, they've got to go through a constitutional amendment process. It's going to be a little bit longer. So I think that for everybody out there, it's a huge day for those who, like us, who have fought for life. And we want to celebrate that, and we then are prepared for the next battle.
In some respects, it strikes me that this was the only decision the High Court could have come to, given, and this is the key part, the sheer divisiveness that exists in our country right now. We're a divided country. This is the biggest division that exists in a country plagued by divisions. And the best way that the court could try to resolve that or find some sort of peace among the factions is to let the states decide. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that taking this out of Washington, D.C., taking this out of the federal courts is exactly where you want to have this debate, because then you get to talk to their direct representatives at the state level, state courts, state constitutions. Listen, some states are going to do things I don't agree with, that a lot of us who are pro-life don't like. States like New York are already doing it, California. And then there's going to be states we have battles in, states like Michigan and some of these others that are kind of like purple states. But I think that, today, ultimately, what the court has said is let the people decide, because there's a competing interest here. They didn't go so far yet as saying that life of the unborn child is 100% equal interest, but that it is a competing interest that we can decide that at the state level. And you're not going to battle this out in federal court. That was very clear today from the opinion, is that there's no constitutional right here. There's no federal right here. So this is going to be in the states. I think people will pay a lot more attention to their state legislators, to their governors, but also to how their state courts are made up, which is very different in every state. Because this has not been an issue it's been all in federal court, that is now it's going to be unique to have these battles at the state level. And we're excited about the ACLJ. And I got to thank TBN as well, because they've been with us since the very beginning on this issue, allowing us just to talk about it. This was just something people didn't even talk about, in the 1970s when the Roe versus Wade came out. even having the discussion about, is this right, morally, legally, constitutionally? And we got to this point today because of organizations like TBN.
Well, I'm sure everybody here really appreciates that comment. Let's talk about how this is going to be presented in the media. We are in the minority. The kind of voice you hear on this network, Fox News and a few others, is in the minority. The vast majority of Americans who get their news from the mainstream outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, you name it, this is going to, the perception, if not the actual facts as reported by those networks, will be that Supreme Court has outlawed abortion in one fell swoop. How do you combat that kind of misinformation?
So we have been preparing for this long before the leaked opinion, that if this day were to come, what do we do? So we've created, we have a C4 organization, we have our legal organization to go out into the states to have this debate with people. Now, the immediate, of course, you've got the immediate Washington, D.C. political reaction. And a lot of that, again, is about political votes, midterm elections. We're thinking bigger than that at the ACLJ because we believe this is a life that we're talking about here and protecting life. So I think what you have to do is go to the states. First of all, is educate people on the truth. The truth is today, if your state had very broad abortion laws yesterday, those laws are still in place today. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's the truth. That the Supreme Court did not invalidate New York's abortion laws. What they said is, don't come to this federal government. This is not where the right exists, and that we shouldn't have created that right in the first place. We got it wrong, and this goes back to you to have this debate in your community at the state level. Mm-hmm. I think once people take a deep breath and realize that, then some people might not have been as engaged in this issue or might not, it's an uncomfortable issue sometimes to engage in. And I think some of us take that for granted who are very active in this issue because it's been a very Washington-focused, federal-focused issue. And now we take it back to the state, back to your community, back to your church, your place of worship. Have the discussion there. Talk about what laws you want to support in your state. And some of that, again, I think it's going to be happening as we speak right now, Doug, and others, there'll be longer-term battles. But I do think what's great is this, and people, just a reality check. The only two countries in the world that allowed abortion the way the United States did, with basically no restrictions at the national level, and we had some of these states that had some different laws, were North Korea and China. We're no longer part of that club anymore. And I think that's something we can all be proud of in the United States. If you look at the other countries, even the Western European countries people think are so liberal, they have the exact same kind of laws as Mississippi's already or more restrictive on the books. So we are actually becoming today more mainstream in the world and we're no longer associated with some of the worst human rights abusers in the world.
Right. We're much more in line with many of the European countries as a result of the Supreme Court decision. Before we leave, I want to ask you about the protests outside the Justice's home, because it seems to me that, and a lot of people are criticizing the Justice Department for having a highly politicized interpretation of those protests. There have been no arrests, even though federal law clearly states that the intimidation of a judge is illegal, punishable by a fine or up to a year in jail. Your thoughts about that, and are these protests going to get worse, and will the Justice Department finally act?
I do think it will get worse because a lot of these politicians are egging it on. So instead of saying, hey, in the United States, we don't allow, we're free speech guys at the ACLJ, and we support free speech. We support a lot of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, and fight for that in court. A lot of pro-life protesters who have chained themselves to the door that have to bring attention to this issue. But it's peaceful still, but they still they were violating the law. They knew what they were doing. Here we have the law. They are violating the law, but the Department of Justice won't enforce it. And this is one of those areas where it's not it's protected free speech right to try and influence a judge with threats or pounding on drums. And so I think we're going to unfortunately continue to see that. I hope and pray that we don't see riots tonight. I think some of that might, we will see if that actually occurs. I know that there will be protests. That's nothing unusual for Washington or major cities around the country on a huge issue like this. But I pray that was just, some of that is the left almost hoping that people will turn violent over this issue. When I think most folks on both sides understand the protest. We respect that in the United States of America. But yes, the Department of Justice did not have to allow this. I mean, we got to a point, we had an assassination attempt on a justice of the Supreme Court, and they still didn't step in
Right.
to stop the out of control feeling outside of some of their homes.
Jordan, last question. You were a key part of Donald Trump's impeachment defense team, along with your dad. Have you had a chance to speak to him? This is clearly Donald Trump's legacy now. Any chance you've had to speak to him? I haven't seen any statements from him.
We have a call into him because, again, he was bold, and he was put forward these nominees, whether Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, sticking with Brett Kavanaugh, where a lot of, I think, presidents would not have stuck with him through that process when they restarted with those allegations that were so bogus, and ultimately, and with Justice Barrett as well, who, remember, it was Dianne Feinstein who said, oh, the dogma lives deeply within her. I think ultimately here, choosing her as a nominee after Justice Ginsburg had passed away, he was, I saw in this first statement he said today, and I thought this was so unique for any former leader because he can take a lot of credit for this. He deserves a lot of credit for this. But he actually gave the credit to God in his first statement today. And I think that it sends chills a little bit in a good way, because you think about I think he understands too the enormity of this situation. So we had the phone call going in today because he has a lot that, again, he could take most of the credit for this. There's been a long fight. I mean, there's been so many people, like I said, TBN along the way since 1973, protesters in the churches, in the communities, politicians, legal groups like ours. And ultimately, it takes bold leaders to put bold people in place. And that's how we got to the decision today, where I can say to you, Roe versus Wade has been overturned. And this is not fantasy that we're talking about.
Hi, I'm Doug McKelway, and thank you for watching Centerpoint. We hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Leave a comment below and keep the conversation going by sharing this video with a friend who needs to see it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.